trying to meet you. Hey.
Welcome to the 20th installment of the STU Street podcast. I am truly excited for today. Not only is this a landmark for our organization as our 20th episode, but I also have a very exciting guest sitting down with me, Amanda Sherlip. Amanda is an executive director at Hands Across the Sea, a nonprofit focused on promoting educational opportunities for children in the Eastern Caribbean through the purchase of new books, as well as she is the co-founder of Personal Habitat, where she has to wear many hats and oversee manufacturing, product development, operations, and more. I look forward to diving into all that Amanda is involved with, but first, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank her for being on the podcast. Amanda, it's a pleasure to have you here.
What a pleasure to join you on such an interesting podcast.
I appreciate that. Well, just jumping back a step, I guess, one of the interesting things I saw, and this has actually somewhat been a pattern over some of the interviews I had, was your background started in music. And prior to your professional involvement in the nonprofit sector, you began as a music and liberal arts major at Stony Brook. So a lot of times, and I said over my past interviews, musical backgrounds have been able to translate into the work life, and a lot of people I've interviewed have actually pulled different motifs or themes from their practices into where they're currently working. Do you find this to be a theme in your own life or hold any truth?
I don't think that I would be successful as a nonprofit director had I not been a musician prior. There's so many aspects of it. I began as a student, then I converted into a performer. I went through multiple phases of my life where my performance overlapped very explicitly with community engagement and social impact.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were also kind of the more general, gentle things of like doing a little performance outreach here and there, which can get lost in the mix, but certainly leaves an impact, when you're 14 and you're playing at a nursing home and you're
Yeah.
spending your weekends doing something very different than 14-year-olds. And then ultimately I became a teacher. So I learned how to listen and analyze in a different way. Spending your whole life on a stage, you learn how to process a lot of sound and information at a rapid pace. I was almost always either the first or the second chair. So I've always been the section leader or the leader of my section or of the orchestra. And
Yeah.
I learned my leadership skills trial by fire, starting as, a 9-year-old who was leading 10-year-olds, an 11-year-old leading 13-year-olds. You learn a lot about body language, interpersonal dynamics. And then when you get older, you start realizing what you have to learn is how to isolate, let's say, two instruments that sound the exact same, but are playing something different, right? So you learn how to attune yourself to what it is that you need to hear or want to hear, how to break things down, how to replay. And that's been very useful across the board in my everyday work.
So it seems like one of the major things that translated over is kind of being a connector. And you're able to learn how to process information in different ways, whether it be sound musically, words spoken, as well as leading a group and bringing things together similar to your roles now. It seems like to me, in my experience in both high school and middle school, a lot of times students, parents make them play an instrument and they aren't as engaged with it as someone that would naturally pick it up or want to be involved in the musical space. Are there other avenues for those types of people that maybe music's not necessarily for them, but maybe there's another way for them to get involved and cultivate those skills?
Well, I might shoot myself in the foot a little here. You shouldn't be forcing children into doing something that doesn't align for them, right? You shouldn't be forcing people to swim against the tide if it's not within, a certain area of skill set. That being said, music in particular provides a tremendous opportunity for the kind of skills development that
Mm-hmm.
I think really benefits society for our children to have imbued in them. You know, one of my challenges as a music teacher was helping parents to understand that it was going to be okay that their child wasn't necessarily on track as the best violinist, the best cellist in the orchestra, and to help them to understand the softer skills, the corpus callosum development, right?
Mm-hmm.
That comes as a result of doing multiple things at once, but that can be had through other avenues. And so in music, perhaps it's happening because a child has to learn how to manage their physical movements and their technique while reading music alphabetically, but also breaking down meter. And so doing all of these things at once while listening is going to force the brain to strengthen in the two hemispheres working together. But corpus callosum development or the social interactions or the creativity, you know, you can find pathways through sports, you can find pathways through physical art. And there's a lot of research that supports kind of what different avenues do it. Not everybody is musically inclined. I do think that all children should have exposure to music, though.
Yeah, no, that completely makes sense, especially at that early age where those skills are so imperative to personal development as well as career development. And you were also exposed, as you said, to various atmospheres where you were able to develop your kind of interpersonal relationships and skills in that sense. You said you played at a nursing home, and that was quite impactful for you at a young age. And so that might have introduced this new side of career avenue. So at what point did you really see yourself kind of wanting to be community engaged, and whether it be at a professional or just personal level?
I think, you know, other violinists and pianists and people playing, you know, very melodic, showcasey kind of instruments probably have stories where, like, you know, their grandma asked them to come and play for, you know, the friend who's in the room. And, you know, there's all different things that happen that as a kid, you start playing for people unexpectedly. And it's a little uncomfortable. It can be challenging to sort of navigate that dynamic. And then as those opportunities started to present themselves to me, I just loved the idea of being able to play anywhere for anyone. I wasn't expecting to learn so much from those I was playing for. And so going to the nursing home or going and playing at the state building, those were introductions that I was prepared for because of that, like, early life sort of social exposure of playing for strangers. But when I was in high school and I started touring with an orchestra, we would spend an entire month overseas. And it was an orchestra that was essentially like an orchestra for the young and gifted, right? So kind of like New York Metro's finest, competing to get into this orchestra that is semi-professional youth, many of whom have gone on to become some of the most famous musicians in the world. And you're sort of thrown into this environment and you're playing this very complex music. And then during the summer, you would travel for an entire month as teenagers with, you know,
Wow.
some hired professional musicians coming with you as well. And if you were a section leader in the orchestra, you were part of these chamber quartets. And so I was, at some points, I was the first chair of the second violin. Sometimes I was the second chair of the first violin. But I wound up being a leader in these orchestras. And that, in combination with my personality and my temperament and my background with leadership, led me to being put on some of these panels or performing in small groups. So I would go from orchestra rehearsal to a hotel where I'd be with a quartet playing for Swiss bankers who were funding us being there. And then the next day we would go into a school in a more impoverished community and work directly with the children. And, you know, a year later, you could be doing a diplomacy tour in Siberia. And, you know, the whole press is there. These young, you know, musicians from America are in Siberia. That's, you know, doesn't happen every day. And learning how to navigate all of that, I found myself becoming more and more excited, but I experienced also the importance of it in real time. All of a sudden, you're going to these places you're told to go because that's what you're supposed to do on these trips as a musician. And then you look back on it and you realize that you were all over TV. You just made a huge impact in a community. People remembered this. People were affected by this.
Mm-hmm.
The children were affected by it. Going to a nursing home in Russia, and we would be working with members of an elderly community who would be jumping up and come to life because we're playing music from their childhood. And it was pretty profound how quickly people were activated and connected, no matter what continent we were, and how music was being mobilized to create bonds and build bridges and help us to establish conversations.
Music's such a powerful force, especially to bring people together, which is such a great thing. I mean, you got to go to so many different locations and different types of people to be able to bring that gift. And to think about at such a young age being able to provide that, looking back on that, it must be so meaningful to you. But at the same time, I bet there was a lot of things that you had to learn throughout that process, especially in terms of those high intensity moments, as you said, the importance of it. You could feel that. And being placed on a stage in front of people that are even funding your travel and everything. How were you able to navigate the stress levels at those kind of those pinnacle moments, if I may?
Up until I was 21, I didn't know that I was in high stress situations when I was doing it. So when I was doing it when I was younger, I was so living the life of the young violinist that there was nothing different about going on stage that was really capturing my stress. What I was stressed out about was, we had a dress rehearsal in this concert hall earlier and the acoustics are different, or, all of these issues about like your job is the performance, right? So there's that fear. I remember when it really hit me, kind of like the bigger picture of it, when I did my first press conference in Primorsky in Vladivostok, Russia. And looking good mattered to me. I suddenly realized that I was a visual representation. And I started to pay attention to the facial expressions I would make on TV and just thinking about that. And that was where the stress started to come in of like, I don't actually have formal training in how to do this. I just got thrown into it.
Yeah.
So it was really more of a retrospective. I just happened to be in leadership positions to have been able to receive those opportunities. I also think that I was probably unexpectedly well prepared for it. I went to work with my mother and my father my entire life, and they were professionals. So I had spent my entire life around adults, interacting with adults and observing how adults interact and present. So I think I was set up for being a little more prepared than might have been expected.
Did you ever feel that although that's super beneficial to the situations you had to be put in, did it ever create somewhat of a blindness where since you were so well prepared, maybe you weren't thinking about small contextual factors that someone who I don't know if I'm wording this correctly, but someone that maybe didn't have that same background?
Well, I think about it all the time now. Every day of my life is work that takes into account that there can't be any assumptions of what opportunities to learn or what resources exist to support growth exist within any household or any household at any moment in time. Everybody's starting point is unique to them. And so, for instance, where I work right now, I work in literacy. I make an assumption that some children have an environment that is capable or able or resourced to support their literacy development at home. I make the assumption that some children's is not providing that. I don't make any judgment about why or why not that would be. That's complex. There's, cultural, imperialistic, socioeconomic, anthropological, natural disaster. I mean, there's any number of reasons why anybody would or would not have. What I do understand is that there are things that we can provide in general for children around the world to help them become better prepared. The way that you identify by doing this podcast, that there is a gap in readiness for many students as they're entering the workforce. Where that gap is coming from, well, there are a lot of different factors, but let's just address what the gap is and make sure that people are getting what they need so that they're better prepared. So I was very fortunate in that way. And I think I advanced as a result of how fortunate I was. But I had treasures imbued in me from my parents that many of those they had to conjure and create for themselves. And so even, observing that and recognizing the difference has allowed me to maybe take it a few steps farther because I had fewer steps to climb to get there. I didn't have to teach myself everything. I could observe and learn.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important too, because since you're able to identify those attributes that have helped you or those learning moments in your life that you've already experienced, you can use that experience to then, as you said, fill in those gaps for other people and ease their process. So transitioning a little bit, we talked about your time in high school and all those great experiences that I wasn't aware of, and that it's fascinating to me, especially with all the international travel. When you moved into college, what was your mindset on what was coming ahead? Because I know for me personally, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do going into college. I just knew that I wanted to get a college education.
So I'm a college dropout, and now I have a master's from Columbia. So I'm a, I don't think that college is for everyone. I think the world needs everything, and college is a great pathway for many people. But when I entered college, I wasn't ready. And so I left. And I didn't come back to college until I was 21. And when I restarted, I decided to start all over again. So when I first entered college, I really had the pressure of, I will lose my health insurance if I am not matriculated. And that is one of those realities that exists in the American family dynamic. And, our parents are doing the best that they can. And when I was coming up, we were still very much as a country in the mindset of everyone has to go to college to succeed. We're in a post mindset of that now, where we're begging people to become technical experts, begging people to go into the trades, right? But that's not what it was at that time. But I also was coming up and going into college, before the stock market crashed, but while unemployment was rampant. So I went to college before the stock market crashed, but after the Twin Towers were hit. And so this was a really strange time in American history. And I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was pretty tired. I was touring every summer. I was having life experiences that I couldn't relate to people around me. And I felt kind of lost and overwhelmed. And I sent out a bunch of applications just as a part of being a violinist. Like, my teacher was like, there's a bunch of scholarships at a bunch of schools, so just apply. I grew up in New York, where you have some of the best state colleges as universities in the world. So I just sent mass applications out to the SUNYs. I did not send my application to my dream school. And I got in, and I still wasn't really sure. Part of what was also plaguing me was I didn't want to put my violin away. All I wanted to do was play my violin, but I also really wanted to be a journalist or a lawyer. I wanted to do something that was going to make an impact. And I didn't understand what's the pathway to making an impact, because my whole childhood, I observed a politician makes an impact. And it seems to me that politicians have a background as an attorney. So I should become an attorney so that I could become an elected official so that I can support people. And then I went through, the 90s and the 2000s, really observing, I'm not really sure if politicians are the persons who are making the kind of an impact that I want to make, but I want to shine a light on truth. I want to be a person who can bring people to truth and be a positive force. And so I went to college unclear of what direction I was going to go in, and ultimately went for the violin. I left. It took me several years before I was ready to come back. And when I did, I came back with a vengeance, and I came back with experiences and a depth of understanding the value of an education that I didn't have prior. I went back really thinking about people like Malala Yousafzai, who got shot in the face by the Taliban because an education was so important to her, and understanding that women around the world die to have an education. And so if I'm going to pursue one, I am going to do so with a lot of passion. And I never looked back. So I spent 4 years in college studying music because that was what felt right to me. But there's I don't know if they're called deck courses still, but we were taking decks. So my major was music. And I was going above and beyond with my major, and I was, overlapping performance with the graduate school. But my deck courses were my requirement for my liberal arts. Where I was going to school, it was kind of known, like, if you want this deck and you want to do it easy, take this course. If you want this deck and you want to do it easy, take this course. And I decided that I was going to take much more challenging courses that were going to challenge me. So instead of oceanography, I took quantum physics. Instead of, this math, I took, this statistics. And so I really pushed myself so that I could get as much out of my education as possible. And in the process, I learned a lot about my work ethic. I learned about my ability to learn new things, or to really expand my understanding of things beyond just what my initial interests were.
How did you know it was the right time for you to re-enter school? You said there was a lot of contextual factors to it, and you knew you wanted to do it properly and with vengeance, but how do you know that was the right moment?
Well, I felt suffering when I was around people who were pursuing their dreams. So I left school. I had a job, but I was also teaching. So I had a studio of, persons I was teaching. And I went on tour again. I went on tour the summer that I became 21. And while I was on tour, I was around all of these very familiar, persons, whether it was musicians or people who I had actually worked with and collaborated with in the past. But now I was one of the adults. I was one of the leaders, one of the planners, people in charge. And I felt pain, and I felt sad, and I felt something I hadn't felt in all those years. In all those years, I felt very comfortable where I was. I just kind of felt like I am where I'm supposed to be. And then I came back from tour this summer, and I didn't feel that way anymore. And I sent an email. I went to my room one night quietly, and nobody knew. And I sent an email to the director of the program that I had dropped out of. And I said, "Hi, I don't know if you remember me, but I really would like to come back." now, basically. And he responded and said, of course, I remember you and we would love to have you back. And I had to go through the whole matriculation process. And I had to convince everybody around me why I was going to take school seriously and not just, waste time and money. It just one day became a burning desire. And when I set my mind on something, and I think a lot of people are like this, when you set your mind on it, then it's okay, now do it.
And that seems to be a pattern moving forward for you too, where you had your hands in so many different spaces, whether it be professionally, and academically, or in the music space. But when you did something, you planned on excelling and doing whatever it took. In college and up until 2015, you worked as a philanthropy consultant. And this seemed to be kind of the start of being able to express your ability to handle a bunch of different arms of a business or project at the same time. Although they do go hand in hand in your industry, fundraising and organizational development, I'm assuming, require vastly different learning curves. Was this role an adjustment for you? And how's your process to approaching a role with so many different aspects developed over your years?
Yeah, being in the industry now, it's more obvious to me the differentiation between fundraising and organizational development. It didn't seem obvious to me in the past. I have some friends who are incredible fundraisers who have no interest whatsoever in organizational development or in those kinds of leadership. And I have friends who have been directors of organizations and they lack skill, capacity, and interest in fundraising. I really approach everything from a problem-solving perspective. And so there is no problem that doesn't require money. I'm a solve by design thinker. And so by defining what the problem is that has to be overcome, at some point in time, the dollar amount becomes clear. But then you're going to deal with the issue of sustainability. And so if you want to solve a problem, you need a solution. A solution costs money. If you want to solve a problem and have that solution sustained or embedded or growing, or you want to innovate in any kind of a way, that's going to continue to be a part of it. And so early on, when I got into organizational development, it was, some of my early exposure was, there's a funding gap. What are we going to do? And entering through there. And then as I'm learning about the funding gap, well, to even make the case for how to solve this problem, we need to be able to really help people to understand the impact. One of the early things that I did was when the sequestration happened, there was no money being devoted to acquisitions and collections at a major institution's library. The implications of that are pretty wide, but one of the first ones is that you're going to lose your doctoral students. If you don't have funding for acquisitions, doctoral students are not going to come to you. Well, when you lose your doctoral students, then this is right. So by starting to pull the thread, it starts to become a little obvious. What's the problem? What do we need? Well, what is it going to do if we solve the problem? Well, how can we solve the problem? Whereas in other instances, I've been, thrust into nonprofit challenges where, well, the program is an issue. Well, if the program got tidied up, then it would become highly fundable. Well, how do you make sure that the organization is fundable, but is sustaining its mission and not following where money is? So all of these things just seemed very obvious to me. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoy untangling something and making it neat. I think about it like a symphony, right? Like you've got your violinist, but how do you put all those pieces together? I never really aspired to be a conductor, but I love what a conductor does. And that's how I think about organizational development. I don't want to be a fundraiser. I'm good at fundraising. There are people who are better, mm-hmm. but it has to be done to accomplish the organizational goals. And to me, it's going to cost less money in the end if the organization is running smarter and better. And so it just kind of, they just live together.
It's interesting to hear you say that, especially with the interconnected nature of everything within not only your industry, but just business in general. It goes right back to what you were talking about when you were playing violin, where you have to be able to read the music, listen to yourself, keep tempo, and do all these various parts to come to a final solution, really, which is the output of the music. And it seems to be the same thing in the nonprofit world, where to be able to solve that problem and fill that gap, you need to know all aspects of the business. And it seems like that's where you came into play throughout all these situations. So, following your time in college, you decided to get your master's in fundraising management and nonprofit administration from Columbia. Oftentimes, there's this pressure amongst undergraduates to seek those advanced degrees as early as possible. But I truly do believe it's a case to case basis. Just as we talked about before, with is college the right decision for you, or is there another avenue? So, how did you know getting your master's was the right decision for you? And what were your main drivers behind this?
Well, I'm extremely fortunate in my college and post-secondary preparedness because my mother was a college professor for 20 years. And so I had expert counsel. She really helped me to understand the implications of school as early as when I was deciding which school I wanted. Actually, Boston University was one of my top two choices.
Oh, really?
But I lived in New York and I had access to SUNYs for in-state tuition prices. And so, my mom prepared me very early saying, if you plan on going to get your master's or beyond, then you can be, you don't have to take this approach to your undergraduate degree. You don't have to, no disrespect to any school with their tuition, but you don't have to pay, $20,000 or $40,000 a year for undergraduate. And my parents supported my journey through college, and they were willing to fully support my journey at a SUNY because they understood that I was going to get a world-class education. Or they would apply that support towards a private school. And so I had that awareness going into graduate school, which led to my very neurotic approach to graduate school, which was I stepped back after I graduated again. And so I graduated in May of 2012 at, later time. I didn't graduate when I was 23 or 21. And I took another semester off and I applied for jobs and I traveled to different communities. I was looking at work in Cambridge. I was looking at relocating to Boston or to Providence, Rhode Island. And I was looking at programs abroad. I was looking at the International Business School in Barcelona. I was looking at schools in the Netherlands. I was looking at moving back to Hong Kong. And then I saw the executive program at Columbia and I fell in love with it. So I did some research on the ROI of the nonprofit industry. And it seemed to me that it was a good investment to go to school for something that was an industry that's essentially in some ways recession proof. And I had to do that for myself because, it's a $120,000 commitment. And I don't regret that commitment because I reap the rewards of it every single day. But I was very aware of what I was stepping into and why. And I spoke with the academic advisor and I said, I'd like to make this my own. Again, my mother taught me, you can make your education your own, advocate for yourself. And so there's a standard set of nonprofit admin courses that are generally suggested. And I swapped them out. And so I didn't need to take statistics again. So I went and did corporate finance in Columbia Business School. Why? Well, I did that. I did organizational leadership. I did marketing. I did human management. I did negotiations. I did conflict. I did technology management. I did those as my supporting because I knew that I was not looking to become a major gifts director. I wasn't looking to become the planned gift director. I wasn't looking to become tracked into certain aspects of fundraising. I was looking to become an organizational leader. I wanted to just get so much better. I wanted to be able to speak corporate in the nonprofit world and vice versa.
It seems like you were able to kind of distill down where you wanted to be, and the program might have helped with that as well. How did one of the nice things too was you came into that experience with previous experiences in that space and work in that space. So how did your collegiate, whether it be undergraduate coursework or your time at Columbia, correlate with those work and extracurricular experiences? Like, what were you able to garner from Columbia that you weren't able to from the work world prior?
So a lot of the work, so the program has changed a lot. The program that I graduated from has changed a lot over the years because when I was going there, it was still one of the kind of like path maker programs before nonprofit master's programs erupted. And when I was there, it was really more of an executive leadership program. So it was evening courses, weekend summers, and it was geared towards people who are already in the field looking to really level up. And so while I was studying, so much of the work was project-based. And so we would be consultants for organizations and work in small groups. I think I learned a lot about myself, about my work style, and I learned a lot about others by being in small groups in that environment. I learned how to navigate varying motivational factors. Some people were genuinely concerned with towing the line and making sure they got an A. I got A's. I was not interested in towing the line. And so we would work together on a consulting solution as a team forced together for an organization. And sometimes you don't agree with the professional opinion of the person that you're working with because you have not selected each other. And so navigating that was really helpful because that's a quiet experience of deciding, what do I want to do right now, right? So do I want to just go with the flow and let somebody else lead this because I don't want my name attached with the product because it's not the recommendations I would have made? Or is it important enough to fight for? And those kind of dynamics are a very good preparation for what happens out in the field. Not everybody who's on your team in the groups has the same level of contribution. But when you're dealing with a master's level program, or especially an executive master's one, there's really, from my view, there's really no space for petty squabbles and allowing emotions to get involved. And I think I took a lot of lessons away observing people who let themselves get caught up in the popularity contest, the friendships, whose interests were there. My interest was in building as strong of a skill set and professional relationships as I could possible while growing my resume. And that worked well for me.
I like how you mentioned the motivational factors in the sense of not only just in getting grades, but like, why are you there? What are you looking to get out of this experience? And for you, you wanted to build up your skill set and truly polish it off and be prepared for your time outside of school. In the for-profit sector, stocks and stock options are usually utilized for managers and upper level employees to act along the values of the company. However, the field you are going to be entering is nonprofit, and these are often non-stock corporations who don't have shareholders, and the mission of the business has to drive motivation organically. This can to people outside of the nonprofit sector, can you give us a little bit of a view into what that looks like and how you're able to kind of mitigate the roadblocks in that?
So how do you have motivational forces for non-shareholders?
How do you, so obviously, the mission is driving the nonprofit, and while all companies have mission statements, it holds ever more true and needed for a nonprofit. However, it's hard to expect an organization with hundreds or thousands of employees to all be on the same page and really abide by the same values of the corporation. So, how within the nonprofit sector do you deal with these problems or make that process smoother?
So everybody talks about mission, and what people gloss over is values. And there is research that supports kind of this space of conversation, which is employees might come to an organization for mission, but they stay for values. And there can be a misalignment. I have been in senior leadership positions where the values that are espoused at the board level don't align with the values at the staff level. But everybody's working towards the same mission. So their interpretation of the mission is different. And sometimes that can expose a problem with the mission statement itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think mission and vision become very clouded at times, right? So you have a mission, which is helping to achieve, a pie in the sky vision. And you realize that mission through X, Y, and Z, programs, services, resources. What is your delivery? What is the thing you're giving? You hire people and you become very consumed with who's going to understand my mission, because I want them to spread the mission, because if they just spread the mission, then people will become motivated. No. It's not that hard to fall in love with a mission. It seems like you'd have to be crazy to not agree that, that children deserve, to read, and that, children deserve the resources they need to read. How you approach that, or what values you have behind it, I think that's the stuff that's really revealing. Sometimes people are just not a fit. Sometimes the organization needs to do work on itself to clarify. I've seen it where organizations are so unclear as to who they are that it exists within the staff and it exists within the board. And when that's happening, I think an organization needs to look at itself and recognize that it has its own identity problem. But when you have longevity of staff and you have longevity of board members, I think that's a really good sign that people generally agree about why they're here. But that takes work. People are very emotionally driven when they're working in nonprofits. There's a lot of emotion involved. And so nonprofits is really, the industry for people, with people, about people.
How have you been able to maintain that connectivity to people in not only throughout kind of the COVID era, but this new generation of hybrid and at-home work environments where you might not see people in your office on a day-to-day basis, or may not see the community you're serving as often as in the past?
I don't think that you can fake caring. And I think that caring people know what it feels like to be cared about. And so I worked for 2 years without ever having physical contact with any of my program officers who are on the front lines in other countries. And yet we have exchanged the words, I love you, I have literally been told, I love you, from people I work with, which I think is a little jarring in the American context, because we're all worried about HR. We're all worried about this and that. it just seems to be what's existing in our organization is people are leading with their hearts. And somehow we were able to create that space without being in physical contact with one another. That being said, being in physical contact with one another really does change things. I have been in a lot of organizations and I've experienced a lot of places where the work environment and the people culture really left me for wanting. And by virtue of Hands Across the Sea being a grassroots organization, it provides me the opportunity to lead an organizational culture that is a reflection of what it is, you know, my own values, what I've always been seeking and wanting, which is an environment that nurtures knowledge, an environment that values the unique treasures that people have. That being said, I have a job, which is I'm a fiduciary and I have to govern. And so the best way that I can lead and ensure success for the organization, which means success for my team, is with clarity, boundaries, direction. Here are our goals. Here are the things that we have to accomplish. Let's talk about it. Within a month, I created a forum. So I joined my organization July 2020. That's a really rough time to enter the education space, especially the international education space. And within several weeks, we had, you know, our entire team on Zoom, and we were holding forum, and we were going through, and we were sharing time, space, thoughts, and we worked together in defining what are the challenges. And my team was very gracious with me in allowing me to make decisions that they invested in. And I got to know them. I called each person on my team one-on-one. And so I have a one-on-one relationship. I created chats that's just us, me and each island's team, all of us as a team. And to me, these were steps in building a culture of transparency. And my team members can call me if they have an idea. And sometimes I integrate their idea into something. Sometimes I thank them for their idea and put a pin in it and say, this is a great idea, but I don't see where it fits in what we're doing right now, but it might be something worth revisiting. And sometimes I let them know why it's simply not something that aligns with the direction where we're going. But I think that the respect was built early and that our communications have been clear and that respect has continued to grow. And we've navigated a lot of challenges. We've navigated changing staff. We've navigated changing finances really well together. At the end of the day, I think everybody cares and everybody knows that everybody else cares about what we're doing and about one another. And so we work together to achieve what we set out for.
And it seems important that you took those active steps to building that transparency and that clarity, because as you said, there can be a separation between maybe the board and the employee base, and even within those groups as to what the true mission is behind what we're doing. Are we all on the same page? But by creating those channels, you're able to kind of streamline that process and make sure everyone is working towards the same goal. One of the things that I love about Hands Across the Sea is you're working for an organization where you produce tangible benefits for children and their families. What has that meant to you, being able to see those benefits in real time and see the books? I mean, you guys have provided over 196,000 new books to children in the Eastern Caribbean. So what has that been like, actually seeing that process?
It's emotional. You sort of have to go in and out of being deeply connected to what it is you're doing and then being able to remove yourself to be objective enough to make decisions. Everybody will tell you what they need and why and immediately. And there's a lot of well-intended nonprofit services that exist in the world, but without strong leadership, which includes difficult decisions, which I just happen to be empowered to make those decisions. It doesn't mean that those decisions are solely coming from me. So I am the decision maker who will be responsible for the outcomes. And so I have to make decisions with that in mind. But my team is a part of the process that we go through. Any number of persons involved in the daily work probably feel a good degree of ownership, which makes sense because we're all touching different aspects of what it is that we're doing. It can weigh very heavily on me that for every one child I reach, I'm missing how many. It can weigh very heavily on me when I know that as much as I'm reaching one child, that child needs more. The issue becomes, what can we do and how can we balance the demands with our capacity most effectively? How can we identify what's pressing and what's within the scope of what we do to be able to make the biggest impact that we can right now without sacrificing our ability to do so tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's humbling. These aren't theories that we're dealing with. These are children who we are serving. And there's a lot of responsibility in that. And so it's emotional.
And going above and beyond in the fact that it's not just the books you guys are donating, but you're actually looking to help perform policy implementation and reform the educational system in communities that might not have those same opportunities as we talked about. I understand that Hands Across the Sea works with a variety of global partners as well, including the World Bank, Caribbean Development Bank, EU, and really whoever can help make that impact. How does Hands Across the Sea leverage these partnerships? And does the company, or how does the company approach developing these changes in more structural educational systems and things that have things that are hard to change truly?
We leverage those relationships carefully. So we are very fortunate that we were invited to join something called the Regional Education Group, which is an advisory group of stakeholders. And those stakeholders include us, the local university, international aid organizations. Our role in it is that we're the NGO. And we received the invitation into this group after more than a decade of grassroots work. And so our work became identified as vital. And what that converted into through our experience with these other stakeholders is that we were able to offer enough insight and frontline experience that then we got to see drafts of the education policy and provide our feedback, right? Offer comments. Well, I've observed that those comments are held with a lot of respect, which I think says more about the partners who we're working with and less about us. Because that's a very service-oriented approach, right? It's not about who's authoring what. It's about how the greatest product or output will be created. So I joined carefully, I stepped into that role. And in the process of it, what we've done is we've been able to leverage our frontline expertise. I'm a firm believer in generosity of all sorts. And so whenever we would strike on information or knowledge that I thought was far too powerful for us to sit on alone, and if in the hands of others could potentially result in decision-making on behalf of children that would really serve them, I would offer that knowledge. But then offering that knowledge, you have to be very careful. Well, how am I offering it? The worst thing that we could do is become imperialistic, right? We're looking to be partners, not tell people how to do anything. And so I would reach out to certain persons and say, we've been working on this project here. Here are some of the observations we've had, and share them. And then I would watch more and more that it was not an offense to share it, but it was welcomed. And then it was, can we have a meeting on this? And what that's evolved to now is we've really become a major, major player in terms of supporting policy advancement, which just translates to we get to bring the kids' voice and the challenges that the teachers face and things that are going on back around. And that helps a lot. There's also a lot of politics that we work, with leveraging, which I will skate past because this, politics are private, but, and also working to make sure that we share networks. You have to share networks if you're working towards things. And people get into this like fear-based hoarding culture. I just don't understand, because this is not the corporate space. This is not the shareholder space. This is in the, humanity has challenges that are more expensive and time consuming to address than we can. And so everybody agrees to stay in their lane. Like we all remind each other, here's what my role is. Here's what my role is. Oh, how can we renegotiate? What's yours? What's mine? How can I help you? How can you help me? All because how do we make sure the children grow up and can succeed?
So it's kind of keeping that balance between knowing where your specialties lie as well as your domain, and also a heavy focus on that end goal and what you're trying to accomplish, which it seems like to me has been able to cut through to those other organizations who have allowed the kind of best plan implementations to win out.
Yeah, I mean, I view my role in the room, first and foremost as being there to remind everybody that literacy has to stay a priority, right? So if that's my goal, then I'm constantly just figuring out how.
Yeah.
Right. How can we make sure that literacy is how can we make sure that there's another, line item in the budget for every national ministry to support this, or what do we see as this, or how can I share what some of the success stories or the core competencies are that we're seeing to help people to realize, the growth and the change. It's a continuum, but it's always, what do we aim to achieve? Who do we serve?
Yeah. On top of your time at Hands Across the Sea, which is already super impactful in its own right, you've taken the time to become a founder yourself. What was that experience like from the beginning, and what drove you to say, I want to pursue entrepreneurship?
I've always been an entrepreneur. When I was in elementary school, was when the first wave of Tamagotchis and Gigapets kicked off. And I was like calling Toys R Us to find out when the next shipment was coming in and buying them and like reselling them when I was like 8. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. I come from a family of immigrants. Immigrants, tend to make their own way. My parents were, my parents both had businesses, and creativity and self-management are very important to me. If I'm going to succeed, I have to self-manage. And I just happened to meet a wonderful person who had a great idea, and we saw the value in one another. So he had an idea, and we were talking about it, and he's like, I'd really like your help. And so it started with, I, carefully made sure not to, say or do anything too offensive. I'm from New York, so we tend to have a little bit of a style to us that can ruffle some feathers. And I came in really from the marketing side. How could I help to market this thing? And then when I was looking at it, I was like, this isn't a marketing issue. This is an operational issue. This is an assets issue. There were other things. And so I came on board I had a hypothesis, and I said, can I be more involved in this? And by that point we had earned one another's trust, and it turned into essentially like this idea that somebody had. He was like, I don't know how to make this idea happen. And I was like, I can make this idea happen. You keep that vision. And then he allowed me to share my vision. And then we became a team. And he allowed me to just rebuild, based on his vision. He was like, there's this problem that exists. People are getting hit by cars, and I am in this world, and I know what people are wearing and what they're looking for. And I need to make sure that people are visible in the streets. And I need to make sure that what they're wearing is something that's really comfortable and fits them the right way and feels the right way. And we talked about, sensory effectiveness. We talked about people just wanting to get out and go, not holding a flashlight, not wearing plastic reflective tape, all these things. And I looked at the products that he was working on. I was like, these are never going to do. Like, this will never hit market. Can I try? And he was just so wonderful and trusting. And we met every single week, and we talked through, and we ideated. And then when I moved back to New York, I got right to business. I found the right designer, but I explored, I made phone calls. I made lists. Who are the people? I found the right designers. And then the three of us became a team. And then when he and I decided on some of the things we were going to do moving forward, it was important to me that before we do anything public, that we patent what we're doing, because this is too big of an investment for us to not have ownership over. So that's kind of the pathway, how it came to be.
Well, you guys have been running for almost 7 years now, so it was obviously a successful operation and continues to be. It seems like there's a lot of little things you had to think about in that initial process that might slip by a lot of entrepreneurs to start, but your time in the business world itself might have helped make that process seem more intuitive to you. What has this taught you since? I know you progressively got more and more involved in different aspects of the business, which some of which you were familiar with and maybe some are novel. So what was that growth process like as your business began to build?
I don't think I had the confidence when I first started that I do now. I was confident. My skill sets are very much aligned with that of a consultant. I am someone who can jump into a new environment, quickly absorb information. And then if I choose to, and if I'm able to devote myself, I can become, an armchair expert on the thing that I'm doing right now. And that allowed me to be a really good consultant. And I applied that to here, but my mom's a scientist, so I take that kind of that approach, right? So like for me, everything starts with like, oh, I have this hypothesis, and how can I test this hypothesis without bankrupting? And so we're in knitwear innovation. So as you know, the patent and the product is reflective knitwear, but it's not just regular knitwear, it's 3D knitwear, which is a lot more complex than it sounds. And in an industry where 15 to 20% of fabric is wasted, which is high waste, the whole garment knitwear is able to have about 0% waste, less than 1% waste. So this is very attractive, and the quality of the product changes significantly once you get rid of seams. There's also a lot of challenges because now you're dealing with an entirely different way a machine works, and now you have to deal with all sorts of aspects that you wouldn't expect to work. I mean, I'm a violinist. I'm not really accustomed to thinking about that, but I'm a curious person. So it's not an unknown concept to me. And so what I kind of quickly gathered was I needed to decide. So what I had already from the nonprofit sector was when you're working on a strategic plan or fundraising plan, but especially a strategic plan, you're going to be doing your market evaluation and your environmental scans. And so I needed to do that. And through that, I identified that it seems to me that reflective knitwear is something desired because I see products that exist trying to do it. And through that, I was able to also derive some of these products are poorly made. Some of these products are ugly. Some of these products look like they're attempting to do something. And I'm pretty sure they're not able to do it because the technique is too difficult. And sometimes I think we overestimate what other people know how to do. And so it would be wrong to assume that it doesn't exist because nobody wants it. And I've seen some really cute fashion pieces where you can see reflective yarn flying around in different directions. When you get really close to the product development, it's not hard to assume that that might have been a byproduct of not being able to figure out how to use the materials. And so instead, making the technical challenge a part of the design. So I started going to trade shows. I started going to all these different industry shows, and I started talking to different people. But the bigger thing was listening to the conversations that reps were having. And so I was seeing very big athletic companies sending not their top people to the trade shows, which isn't surprising. I think that's a huge part of the mistake. And so in the process, what I've learned is sourcing materials is getting outsourced. Technical approach is getting outsourced. Design, right? So people are being given their things. Well, this is a real knowledge management breakdown. Why would you have somebody so far removed from the technique doing the fabric sourcing, or so far removed from the manufacturing, right? So through that process, not only do we have a technique patent because we hold that IP, but we already have ideas for how to do fiber innovations that could lead to us having another technical solution. We're pre-market. We only got our patent during COVID. And so with everything that shut down during COVID, we had to rebuild our assembly line, our supply chain. But we as an organization hold all of that knowledge. And I think one of the biggest things that I learned is there's a lot of companies that are too big to handle innovation. There are a lot of companies who became so big that the quality of their products decreased so that they could sustain their bottom line despite the fact that they had a larger overhead. And in the process, they decreased the quality of their materials, which made their product a lower quality at the same price. And what we're going to find out is if there are a lot of people who still want something that's really high quality and really effective.
So it seems like that in-house control rather than outsourcing was super beneficial to you, as you were not only able to understand all aspects of the business and find those true pain points, but more easily adjust because there weren't as many moving parts.
Wool gets discontinued quickly, right? So that's just one instance, right? So a product becomes discontinued. How long does it takes a long time to deal with that process with one person dealing with it, because when you deal with a mill, you're dealing with a sales rep of this, then all of these people have to check with this rate. The more people are involved, the longer the process is going to take. So we can be really agile because I'm the person who gets the information. All I have to do is call my partner and he'll pick up the phone and we're like, what do we do? Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then we pivot.
So it's interesting you say that. Actually, at the start of conducting these podcasts, we were a much larger organization and we didn't have any content out. We had about 8 to 10 people, and it was mostly me pitching the idea to various students, trying to get people involved, pitching it to the university, trying to get club funding. What I realized after about a month through this process was I had no content. I had no true base to reflect upon. And so I decided to completely pivot, and our team became lean and became down to 2 people. And we just started making videos. And from there, I was able to realize actually how this all should work, what people I need involved, and everything from there. So it really resonates with me when you say that, because I experienced that firsthand. but it is hard to fathom sometimes that a big organization might have more difficulty in innovating. Uh, what do you see the pathway forward for your company? I guess over the next few years. I know you said you got patent your patent completed over the COVID years. So, what do the next steps look like, and how do you see your business growing in that sense?
So we're determined to have our manufacturing be in the US. So all of the materials that we use, we have those relationships secured. And if we needed to change those, then we would, but we're very happy with the materials we're sourcing. But we are in the process of moving our manufacturing from one state in the US to a different state in the US. And so in doing that, I've already had the preliminary meetings with the external teams at the facility where we would be manufacturing. They don't have product development capacity, but we do. We have a design and technical expert on our team. And so we will be working to relaunch our product after it goes through a new manufacturer. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to launch the product when we recognized that the capacity of the previous manufacturer was not going to be able to keep up with our goals. Because what if we put a product out there that we can't replicate because we changed manufacturer? Now you've got a brand issue, right? So we only want to make a promise once to people of what quality they can expect from us. So the next step, I have all my materials in my closet behind me, is to go in and do a new swatch development. And when you develop that swatch, now you identify your math. What's the tension? What's the speed? What's this, that, so you get basic code. From there, we want to do production and do direct business to consumer. We want to do a second. So we have a beanie, and the target market for the beanie is a runner, but everybody should want it. But if it could stay put and feel good on a runner, then it'll stay put and feel good on everyone. Then we want to also make sure we have a headband. Not everybody can wear a beanie. And so having a headband resolves that. It also allows us to have a different technical approach. One is, vertical, and one's horizontal. Mm-hmm. And there's some cool things about that. Then we can pursue making a product for other people who need safety and function. By the way, it's really fashionable and chic, and I think a lot of people are just going to want it. Mm-hmm. It's just awesome. It's an awesome product. But what about people who are working in construction or on the side of the road, at 5 a.m. or at dusk and dawn? How can we make sure that they have something that doesn't interfere with their lives to wear, but in fact enhances their life while keeping them safe? It would be fun to get into licensing. It would be lucrative to get into licensing. I think that any company who wanted to buy us would find that we're open to those conversations, but they would probably want to buy us because I think that we as a team are a critical component in the success of this. Mm-hmm. So the goal, and then, there are other products that we could make. So right now the materials that we have, they're wicking, they're antimicrobial. They offer gentle compression, but they're reflective. Well, we could explore what it means to do that, but to do things that are anti-mosquito, anti-mite, thermal, UV, right? So we're interested in following what the market responds to while also having fun. I wouldn't mind seeing our beanies, like licensed with sport teams, or a company like Patagonia, taking ownership or whatever it may mm-hmm. be. This is sort of just the beginning for us.
And it seems like you gave yourself some flexibility as well into kind of what the future looks like, but prepping the work now. And one of those key things, as you pointed out, was in manufacturing, if they can't keep up with your capacity you need or the demand in the market, that could hurt you if down the line if you don't do it properly. So setting yourself up well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people in the knitwear industry coming from the outside and coming in, you know, it looks like a lot of people have tried to tackle concerns and issues around things like this. And I've seen some companies where they take the approach of buying the machines themselves. It looks like for a lot of people that presents some dangers because once you own the machines, now you really have to make those machines worth it, right? It's not the machine itself. You have to have a technician. Oh, well, it's not just a technician. You have to have this. And then suddenly people start having to branch out into industries they didn't want, like perhaps being the manufacturer of like on-demand clothing for others or selling that, you know, and so we sort of we determined early on that, you know, we're a product development and a technique, like this is what we do, but we want outside partners for manufacturing, but we want those partners to feel like they're a part of our goal.
I really like how you put that, and you're really finding a way to impact in a variety of ways within your life. Um, and the mission behind this part, I really like that it's for the safety of people in a community-oriented way. And I'm personally a runner as well, so that's something I'd be interested in. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. I have just a few more questions. I don't want to hold you for too long, but firstly, while most students would state that they do want to do meaningful work, well, with many of the things that you've already stated, decision making can be confounded by social and internal pressures, especially in the college environment. And this can lead young adults to enter fields that their values don't truly align with. While monetary security is important, I feel that the nonprofit sector is often neglected in the undergrad environment, and the rewarding nature of the work is not given the chance it deserves by the majority of students. Given this, can you give your perspective on why students should look at jobs in the nonprofit sector and how you believe they can kind of or dip their toes into this type of work prior to entering the workforce?
Um, the nonprofit sector is part of the fibers of the US workforce. And it can be very disheartening the way that it is pigeonholed. And I think that we have a public awareness issue, right? So I don't have the numbers at the top of my head right now, but just in terms of the financial output of what the voluntary sector, that's one thing, right? But like how much of the GDP in the US or how much of, you know, the tax dollars that go to the US. I mean, so much of our workforce is nonprofit persons. And people really overlook what a nonprofit includes. I think we're very set on this like anger that we feel that I'm not sure is justified more than it's just rhetoric of this idea that it's no tax. That's not actually entirely true. Nonprofits can earn income, which is great. If they earn income, it helps to subsidize programs. If they earn more than a certain percent of like their, you know, income through earned income, they simply pay taxes on that. That's a good problem to have. It's a good problem if you earned enough money that you're paying taxes, because that means that you're subsidizing a lot. Or it means that maybe the money you're earning is able to go to paying salaries and the money you're raising goes to programs, which is just good for optics. And I'm going to leave it at optics because I'm not a believer that we should be perpetuating low salaries for nonprofits. My organization spends less money on materials than we do on people. My people can do their job without the materials. The materials can't do the job without the people. It doesn't matter if I give everybody books. Those books will have a year's worth of use unless there's leadership to instill utilization or something like that, right? So if we first kind of just accept that nonprofit work is dignified and we shouldn't be looking at it as pay as little as possible, rather for every person who's not in the nonprofit sector, that person's in the corporate sector, which means that that talent is going toward accomplishing a capitalistic goal. The whole paradigm is broken from my perspective, why are we protecting, no offense to the person who works at Coca-Cola, all work deserves respect, but why are we protecting the interests of the person who is helping Coca-Cola to profit when Coca-Cola's product is sugar, chemical, carbonated beverage in exchange for dollar? Why does that person's work deserve more dignity and pay than a person who is helping sobriety, a person who's helping post-traumatic stress, a person who is helping education? So your social workers are often nonprofit workers, or, people want to talk about the transformative, relationship that they have with music, or how much they love this or that, or even just as simple as you want to live in a community where you've got access to doctors. Well, a lot of the time doctors like to have cultural things to do around them, right? So you're dealing with museums, that brings tourism. All of these things benefit everyone. The absence of these services cost everyone more. When you don't have a social worker, when you don't have a literacy program, how much money is it going to cost the government or the community to remediate things down the line? Every person who falls off the wagon in their sobriety is not just potentially, impacting their family, but what are the other implications? What are the costs for everybody whenever we don't raise one another up? And so when it comes to working in the nonprofit sector, I will never advocate for low salaries. And I will not hire people unless I can hire them at a salary that I think is dignified. And I will not take a job at a salary unless I think it's dignified. And that's a values thing, is you come to your board and you let them know, this is what my value is, and allow me to show you how I can make value, because this is what my time is worth. This is what my time is worth, and I want to use it for good. And I see the industry moving more in that direction. And I think that is drawing more young people. The salaries are lower. I could make twice the salary in the corporate sector. I'd also be making a lot of trade-offs that I'm not comfortable with. I would have to engage in certain approaches to leadership that I don't believe in. I would not thrive. And I think that there are a lot of people who feel that way. So if you want to do something that offers a lot of meaning, you can go into the nonprofit sector. It has its challenges that are endemic to the industry, but those challenges, I think, will dissolve more and more when we move away from the pay gouging. And so when organizations set a budget that reflects appropriate salaries, then they will market themselves as having a higher operating budget, which will lead to them hopefully raising that higher amount of money and functioning with motivated leaders that they can retain, right? Low wages, low retention. So persons who they can retain that can help to grow value over time, grow with an organization and serve and lead. And perhaps we can get away from this. Nonprofit means, low wage.
Yeah. I think that shift in perspective is important. And the fact that you said knowing your value and knowing how much you're worth doesn't take away from the purpose of the business. If anything, it enhances it, because you're able to attract higher talent and people that can contribute to it even further. I think this is one of the major gaps experienced within the college level, is people see it as that low wage option, and coming out of college knowing you have debt and all this stuff, you're like, oh yeah, I'd really like to work in that space, but I don't know if that's the best option for me right now. I think being able to mitigate those barriers with things such as competitive salaries or other benefits may help attract those students. Right now as well, I feel there's a similar thing happening with the volunteer space in college, where I have friends that volunteer. I've personally volunteered, but there's often this connection between, okay, I need to fill out my resume let me go put in some volunteer hours, rather than really understanding what it means and what it's for. How can we kind of seize that gap and have volunteering become something at the college level that um, isn't just for resume boosting and isn't just for, oh, grad school or whatever it may be?
Okay, so I want to answer that question. I also want to rewind for just a moment. This idea that people want to leave college, first the question is, I don't know what colleges are setting students up to believe their, preliminary salaries should be when they're leaving. But I do know that some very high earning careers in certain aspects of, let's say, accounting or financial management are starting at $30,000, and people are being told, after you develop the skills and you build your own portfolio, you can make six figures. You can make six figures as a nonprofit executive, and you shouldn't apologize for it, because you can make double that six figures in the corporate sector. How much is enough, right? So do you want to start at 40,000? Do you want to start at 60,000? Do you want to start at 80,000? But where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? In the nonprofit sector, a lot of people with a background in accounting or in law wind up in the plan giving space. They could be making $250,000 a year. They'd be making $400,000 a year, perhaps elsewhere, but they're really, really satisfied, because $250,000 a year is generally enough, right? And, nonprofit CEO positions, small organizations might have $60,000 to $80,000 for the salary. Large organizations could easily have $190,000 to $500,000 in the salary, because you could be dealing with the NFL is a nonprofit, right? So don't ever discount what it means to lead a nonprofit. Museums are a nonprofit. Do you really want somebody who's making $100,000 to be running the New York Public Museum? No, you do not want such an important position at such a large organization to be, well, whoever was willing to take it at this pay. But what you're coming into, your starting salary could wind up being the same as what it is when you're starting somewhere else. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to, if you want to be a development director, you're going to be making six figures. These are not low wage positions. There are plenty of them that are low wage. So just want to kind of mention that, which is, I think, the perception of what should I be earning? Yeah. Well, then when people accept a lower starting income, they usually do it because they're being told by somebody very compelling. But within this amount of years, if you work hard, you can make this much. There are also other pathways to, within that number of years, make that much. So then back to your question about volunteering. I really think, like, as a hirer, as a mother, as an educator, I hope desperately that students pursue their extracurricular activities from a place of authenticity. And so this idea of having all of these things on your resume, if you can't connect on a practical level with the why, then it's lacking in purpose. And so I think it first comes down to just being honest with yourself. Why am I volunteering? And if it's, I'm volunteering because I want to be competitive in the job market, then there might be other ways to go about things. But performative volunteering is self-serving, and it is a contradiction of what service is. Yeah. And so I am a better person because I've spent a lot of hours in my 20s in food kitchens. I have spent a lot of hours packing lunches. I've spent a lot of hours working with people in the community. I have learned things that I can't unlearn. There is nothing that can place what it feels like to know that I'm just, some 22-year-old schlub who, hasn't earned anything in my life. And yet I'm empowered right now to give an adult food who is avoiding eye contact out of some sense of shame that they need to come and receive a service. And the experience of that, of why is this person experiencing shame? Why should anybody have shame that they need help? I can't believe I'm in a position that my life is so comfortable that I can choose to help.
Yeah.
What more can I do? Why are these issues plaguing us? Like these were real things of how can I be of service in a way that I feel comfortable, and what am I learning from it? It's very different than, well, I did this for this and I did this for this. I'm not looking to hire anybody who has a bunch of I want to really understand, like, what did you learn? What did that feel like?
Definitely. And I've had limited experience with it. I definitely want to get more involved. But even in the few experiences I've had, it broadens your world and it allows you to see different perspectives as well as how other people have been put in different situations that they didn't necessarily have the choice for. I think that's a very, very important factor, especially early on in life, where it can instill a different mindset going forward. So I'm definitely on the same page as you, where even if you haven't done it before or are nervous about starting, it's a great thing to get involved with, whether you're in high school, college, early adult, or really any time.
But it's not just things that people that maybe somebody's circumstances are their own fault. Maybe they are, and maybe they aren't. Some of my favorite nonprofits are organizations who provide services without vetting certain qualifications. So not making receiving services based on your socioeconomics makes sense for certain organizations. Let's say it's an organization that's focused on providing meals to people who are sick and homebound because they're sick. Should you not be allowed to receive that because you can afford to pay for meal delivery? It's a complex thing, because from the fundraiser side, from the smart business side, why would you deprive services of people based on socioeconomics? This is strictly from the business side. You don't know who's the quiet millionaire who's going to leave you an enormous gift to make sure that you can continue doing this for others because they received the service. And it's an uncomfortable thing for people to say out loud, but it is the truth of, you actually could wind up receiving more than you've given. There is a reason that a person is seeking a program or support, because it's not just the item they're getting. Sometimes it's the connection that they need, the care that they need. And they need that care to come from somebody who they're not paying to give it to them. And that's a part of the service they're getting. So sometimes who we're providing for, they've done it, their need for service is unvetted, right? Whether it's somebody who did something that resulted in their own undoing, or they're a product of circumstance and everything in between. The exposure that you have to humanity through volunteering is going to make you a better person, because we tend to just stick with our own. And it's okay if you want to stick with your own. There's nothing wrong with that. But I certainly have gotten to, my politics have changed, my ideologies have changed, simply because the things that people say don't align with what I've seen and experienced. So why wouldn't we be pushing more people to connect with humanity more?
Yeah, I think that kind of sums up everything perfectly. And just look for those opportunities to connect. And on top of that, I just want to know, as one final question, if you were to go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice as a 20-year-old music student, knowing everything that you've garnered so far in your career, what would that be?
Well, I wasn't a student when I was 20. Um, trust the process. Keep a portfolio. I turned down a lot of jobs when I was younger because the pay was too low. That was really difficult for me because I wanted those experiences. I don't know if I would have changed those decisions. It was really hard at that time, but just keeping a portfolio and taking your time and knowing that not everyone and not every opportunity is for you, and that the things that you think you want to do might not be what is best for you to do, and to stay open to that. I thought I was going to be running a symphony. I thought I was going to be, that was the direction that I was going to go in. I am so gratified with what I'm doing. And I've still found a pathway to doing the type of work that I would have been doing and working with the type of people I would have been. So I don't know, trust the process, stay flexible. Don't be so rigid.
It seems like you ended up where you wanted to be, in the sense of it has all the aspects of kind of the perfect culmination, even though it might not have been where you thought you would be.
Yeah, I'm doing all the things that I love, and I feel proud, and I also feel the pressure of how important it is. And I don't think that people know what to do when they feel unmotivated, but there's nothing as motivating as knowing that people really need your help.
I completely agree. And thanks again for taking the time out of your day to do this. I really appreciate it. And I hope a lot of this resonates with people tuning in. On top of that, as a podcast, we have just begun our fundraiser for Hands Across the Sea. We'll be raising money all semester. So I'm looking forward to getting other people involved, and hopefully we can hit our goal. So everyone, make sure to check out at George Sherman Union. We'll have booths set up throughout the semester, as well as we'll be all over campus. So look out for it.
Thanks so much. You're a neat guy with a neat mind and a good heart.
I appreciate that. And hopefully we can stay in touch moving forward.
Absolutely.
Hope you enjoyed that episode. If you like our content, subscribe. The button is below. If you want to see another video, our latest one is right here, or another one right here. 2 options, 2 videos. Have a great day.